Welcome, Happy Mamas, to another episode of Happy Mama TV. I'm your host, Patricia Rivera-Wolfson, and today we have a very, very special guest. Our guest is Megan Hale, and she is a retired psychotherapist and an enoughness coach. Megan, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It is awesome to have you here. I know that we have a really important discussion today, so when we were speaking just before recording, we were talking about what would be an important discussion. And you mentioned something that really is something we go through all the time. And that is grief and emotions of change. So let's talk a little bit about that.
For sure. So for all of the listeners, I still consider myself a new mama. My little boy is 7.5 months. So I think we get to claim the new mama for at least a year, right?
Yeah, totally. You're still in for a while.
I think we all know, as moms, there's so many emotions that go into just everything you experience, not only giving birth, but through the pregnancy. It's just an emotional time for a lot of us. I mean, we're doing some of the most sacred work we've ever done in our lives by growing a human in our bodies and giving birth to it and raising this little soul and getting to know them and starting to balance all of these big pieces of our lives of being a mom and also being a business owner and being a wife and being a friend and all of these roles that we really take on as women. So it was really, really interesting to me because I have been really looking forward to kind of getting my cycle back because I'm a breastfeeding mama. And, when we breastfeed, usually our cycle takes a while to catch up to us. So I've been really looking forward to this because I'm I could be potentially ready to have another baby. So this thing happened 2 days ago. And instead of being really excited, I was really, really sad. And yesterday especially was just a whole lot of grief came up for me. And it really shook me. It's wow, what is going on? And it's almost I feel like I'm being ejected from this little baby bubble. And nobody told me that I was going to be ejected from it. So I'm total in resistance and denial of no, I'm not ready yet. And I think, for me, I really had to hold some pretty big space yesterday and even today still of just allowing myself to really feel what I'm feeling and honoring what's happening, what's coming up for me. And I think that this so relates to life in general, right? Because I think sometimes we get ejected from things before we're ready or life doesn't send us the memo. We're wait, what? And grief is one of those processes that we go through a lot more often than we actually think, because grief isn't just about losing somebody. It's about losing anything. We kind of have to mourn things. And that's where I am. I'm mourning this little baby bubble that I've been in and really looking to, so what comes next? And now how am I going to redefine myself, right?
That's so important. You're so right. And as we were talking about, that really happened for me after giving birth to my third, which I had already kind of thought in my head, this is it. And so you have that bittersweet, oh, cute little baby. And at the same time, I remember when he was born, trying to soak in every last ounce of that babiness, because I recognized that it was going to be the last time I held this tiny little baby. And I remember missing him as a baby while he was in my hands as a baby, because, then there's all this emotional stuff attached to it. And I was able to write about it. I think about a year and a half later, a year to a year and a half later, I wrote a Huffington Post article about that time where it's do you have another one? And I was past the age that I had decided that I was going to have any more babies. And I was so do I have another one? Does this mean I'm meant to have another one because I'm having those feelings? Or is it just how do I get past this and realize, wait, I'm done being a baby mama and I'm now the mom of kids. And, the way the life cycle kind of, or society paints the life cycle, you're born, you start walking, you graduate, high school, college, get married, have a baby, and then retire and die. And I was oh my God, I'm so close to death right now. It was it hit me where I'm oh my God, I'm old. And not that I'm old, but that was the feeling, the emotional feeling that hit me.
No, totally. I mean, I have the exact same feeling too. Like I'm holding this, and he's still tiny. I mean, this is a little tiny kid, but I'm like, you're so big compared to how you were when you first came out of my belly. And it's just, it is really bittersweet, and it's a lot to process. And I think for me, the thing that comes up is time feels like it's just going by so fast. And everyone always tells you that. And when you're a new mom, you kind of like roll your eyes like, oh my God, stop telling me that. Everybody keeps telling me that. And then you're like, but it really does.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a really beautiful reminder to really be present. And that's one of the things that, these emotions have incited for me, is just to really be here right now and soak it up. Like I hope to have another baby. I don't know if that's going to happen, but knowing like these past 7.5 months are just, and here I am entering this new phase. And it's like, so there's so much change that happens all the time. Like I feel like we're always integrating things. And I think that that's going to continue regardless of how old our children get. I mean, that's life. We're constantly having new experiences that we have to integrate, and they change our beliefs and they change our identity. They change how we view the world and how we view ourselves. So really staying in touch with that, I think, is so incredibly important for staying connected.
Yes, yes, that absolutely. It's interesting because my oldest is 8, and one of his spelling words was the word adapt. And I was trying to explain to him like what adapt means, because he had to write it in a sentence, right? And I was like, well, how do you adapt? And he was like, well, he was going with something else. And I went, well, how do we adapt in the family? And he goes, I adapt to fighting with my brothers. I was like, well, that's not really adapting. So we went on to this thing, and I was trying to get him to say like how you adapt to a new baby as a brother, and he was there for obviously both of his brothers' births and adapting. I think we ended up going with something else, but there is this, and I like the word that you use, which is integrate, where you kind of enter this new phase of life, whatever that might be, and you have to integrate that new aspect into who you are, because it's not like that other stuff disappears. You're still that young-minded person, and you still probably feel the same as you felt in college or growing up, and you don't feel older, but there's aspects you have to integrate into your life. I love
well, you think about it like, especially this time of year with the new year and everything, this is such a great time to really sink in to what you need to integrate from the past year. I see a lot of times with my work with women, like when we don't spend time reflecting on the things that have happened, like the big losses, but also the big gains, and really taking time to appreciate those, to celebrate those, to mourn those, to release things, to really call things in, we start to lose like a sense of who we are becoming. And we are always in the process of becoming. So I like to kind of say to keep a finger on the pulse as we are journeying through life, because it allows us to be more aware, like when we're going through shifts, when things have really changed for us, or more importantly, when things do need to change for us. Our happiness, our satisfaction, our fulfillment has started to decrease. When we're really in touch with that, we can kind of be more aware and kind of put out the fires as they, are arriving, instead of letting this big old bonfire happen and like, I don't even know how to touch that.
Yeah. And, it's, as you're talking about that, it also makes me think of the things that you mentioned it, like the things that we need to let go of because we have reached a new phase. It's like trying, keep a finger on the pulse of what is now. And just because you had this like dream of doing something, not like to let go of your dreams, but there's certain things that evolve. It's like, well, I always wanted to do this. And maybe your dreams or ideas of what that looks like evolves, but you're still caught up in your mind in that idea that you had as like a 12-year-old girl. And it's like, well, you need to evolve with that because you're a different person now. And that's so important.
Absolutely. And I think, I kind of compare it to, so the way that we kind of form our identity is based on our life story. And depending on where you are in your self-awareness, you might tell your story a very particular way. But in order for us to grow, we sometimes have to shift that story Sometimes we might leave pieces of this story out as our way of really leaving something in the past. We're no longer carrying it forward with us into the future. Or when we really do some healing on something, we see our story from a different lens. So I think for us, like as we move forward, as we're becoming, as we're integrating all of these things, when we really shift our story, this opens us up to, seeing ourselves in a different light, which allows us to be somebody a little bit different, right? It allows us room to grow and breathe and shift, which is exciting.
Yes, absolutely. I love that idea of the idea of the story is not just an idea, but it's such an important illustration of what we do. It's so true. If your story is always, I was the loser, or I always lose, or, I never get things my way, and that story continues to be the story you tell to others. Well, I guess I didn't win that because I'm always the loser. I guess I'm not going to get that job because of whatever. I guess my kids are not going to listen because I'm a loser, and you continue that path, then things can't change. So can we take that idea and make it concrete for someone? Like, can you give us an example of how you can shift that? Or for someone who might be listening and thinking, do I have a bad story? Like, is my story not working for me? Can you help us with that?
I want to approach this from two different angles because I think that it will be helpful. So there's something important that happens when we shift our story ourselves, but in a parallel framework, it's also really powerful when we ask somebody else to shift out of our old story too. And here's what I mean by that. So I have a very rebellious past. It's like super juicy. I'm writing about it in my book that's coming out this year called Wild and Holy. And
oh my God, I have to read that book. Just the title alone. Aside from the fact that I'm totally curious about your wildlife. That sounds awesome.
So there was a lot of a lot of rebellion in my adolescence, because I was a born seeker. Like, I've always been a craver for truth, to do things my own way, to find my own answers, and to have my own journey. And so growing up, that came across as me being very hard-headed, stubborn, strong-willed, which wasn't like the best thing for my parents, because they were like, what do we do with this child?
Yeah.
But because of that, what was really going on is I was really fighting for my own authenticity. I needed to have my own beliefs that differed from my parents, and it created a lot of tension for us. And because of that tension, it created a lot of pain in our relationships. And for probably about a decade, we really struggled to love each other the way that we all needed. Me and my mom, me and my dad. And so a lot of my journey has been learning how to unravel all of this, and knowing that I was always loved, even if it didn't feel like it, knowing that they were doing the best that they could. But before I did a lot of that healing, I was very much in victim mode. And when we're in victim mode, we tend to blame others for the way that we are. So because of the way that I felt a lot of shame, like I wasn't good enough as I was. Hence, I'm an enoughness coach, because that's what people do, is claim their enoughness and worthiness.
Kind of makes sense.
Because of that, I was very wild. I went into toxic relationships that were not good for me. I settled for far less than I deserved. I used drugs and alcohol to like totally numb myself out, because I didn't know how to cope with my emotions. And my story back then was always blaming my parents for why I was doing what I was doing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And interestingly, my parents also blamed themselves. It was their fault that I was doing what I was doing, which was not the whole truth. So we kind of grew and evolved together. And it's actually a really beautiful love story in a way, because as I healed my relationship with my parents, and I healed the emotional pain that I was carrying, my story was no longer, it was my parents' fault that I was this way. It was, I didn't know how to cope, and so I did the best I could. And so it really forgave my parents. It released them from this responsibility that I was making them carry in my life. And so I was getting better. But here's the thing. Every single year, my parents would give me birthday cards, right? Totally normal. And these cards would be like these most beautiful, sweet, loving cards. We're so proud of you, blah, blah, blah. And in the card, they would always write, we're so proud of the woman that you became because we were really worried for a while. Okay? This is not that big of a deal, right? It really isn't. But for some reason, every time they would say that, it would bring up the past, that I was always going to be that rebellious girl who they were so worried about, who was so lost, who was so broken, all of those things. And I said, that's in the past for me. And I've become so much more whole since then. And I'd really appreciate it if you just would say, we love you. I don't need to know that you're proud of me because you're so worried about the past. I know that you are worried. I lived that with you. So it was a really subtle shift to ask them to no longer include that in the cards, but they got it. And so as we move forward together, it's no longer like bringing up the past of, whew, those were some rough times we went through. And it's allowed me to grow beyond that. And our relationships have also transformed tremendously since then too. So I think when we shift our story, when we heal it, it's very powerful for us to do it for us. I think it's also a very powerful move for us to ask the other people that we love to come with us in whatever ways feel good for you.
I love that aspect because it's almost like that card and that reminder is anchoring you back into the past, where it's like you can't let go if they're not letting go. And to a certain extent, you can't control how other people speak about you, or they say, and how they sort of process things. I have a very very similar story, and so I laughed when you said Wild and Holy is fantastic, because yes, I went through a very similar period with my family where everybody was like, okay, whatever, like she'll figure it out. I moved away. I was in New York, still am. Anyway, so I completely relate to that story. And there is something to it where it's almost like the success you have on some level is there's like two aspects to it, where partially it's tainted because it's like, it's almost like your success is exalted because you were so down in the dumps. So it's like, now you're like, oh my God, how amazing you are, and also that aspect of the connection still to that person. And you're like, I was awesome then too. I just didn't know how to sort through my awesomeness.
No, it's really like you're rewriting your story and you're letting somebody else know that that's no longer how I see it. I've integrated it in a different way. And the cool thing is that because I took responsibility for my stuff and was able to heal it, I also gave my parents permission to do the same. So you don't have to blame yourself for what went wrong with me, because look at where I am now. And like, it was such a gift looking back. It wasn't when we were going through it. It was all like painful as hell.
Sure.
But it all grew us in really beautiful ways. So I think when we reframe our stories, it shifts how we think about ourselves, how we think about our past. And it offers us the opportunity to forgive, to release shame, to look at how far we've come, to even practice gratitude for some of our biggest mistakes. Oh my God, like, you want to talk about like rebellion and making some really huge mistakes? Like, wow, like when you're on drugs and alcohol, you don't even know like what you're doing half the time. And you say things that you would never say. You do things you would never do. You're not acting in accordance with your morals and values. And anytime we're doing that, we feel shameful. Like, that is the definition of it. So to go back and forgive yourself and even like be so grateful, like, oh my gosh, you gained so much wisdom by doing that. Turn something really negative into something that empowers you moving forward, which is, I think, the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I like that. And it's almost like you look back on those memories and like wash them through a cycle, where it's like they're still there as they are, but they look cleaner because it's like, look, these were part of the journey. I always compare people's stories to like the hero's story or the hero's journey, but literally like from movies. I always like think, the superhero doesn't all of a sudden come on the screen and is like this awesome superhero right from the get-go. Like the movie would be boring. It's like, oh wow, he's perfect. It's always a journey. There's always like these, dragons they need to fight, or this villain who's trying to destroy the world, and he always makes mistakes, and there's always like regret, and there's always this story where you're like, why? This is not me. This is not meant for me. I'm not meant for greatness. And yet they accept that responsibility. And then once they get to the other side, they're like, oh, I am a superhero. Awesome. And I think people are like that too. I think like,
oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. I mean, there's so much personal freedom with this. And so I think, when I look back on my life, like wild has several different meanings. Like one, I was wild, like way out there. But on the other hand, I was wild in the sense that I was fighting for my freedom and I wanted to live free. And that was my way of doing that back then. And I can actually use that piece of myself, which I call the rebel in my personal work. I can use rebel as that courageous side of me that will always fight for more freedom, to be freer where I am now, to make sure that I'm living as true to myself as possible, and that there's so much sacredness in that. And in fact, in order for us to see ourselves as sacred, like we have to fight for our own freedom, right? And know that it's so important.
I love this conversation so much. Earlier this year, I started thinking about, and I'm sure you can relate to this now that you're a mom, even though you're still a new mom, but there is this very important element to motherhood, which I always use the term integration, because there's parts of your personality or parts of your story that you start to disconnect from once you become a mom, because that person, that rebel that may have existed, that was not mother material, shall we say?
Yeah, you can say that.
Right? Like she was not, and I think of that because, like I said, I relate to your story, and it was a realization I had this year, that I was starting to deny that part of myself, that go-getter, that like relentless, like I'm going to get what I want, whatever it takes, in a good way for the most part.
Totally.
But like that fiery firecracker that I was, I put her away, because that fiery firecracker was not mother material. And so when I became a mom, I took on this persona, and it's not a persona, it's a part of me too. But it was like all of a sudden I only focused on those nice qualities that moms should be. The nurturing side, like the loving side, the, having a nice, happy home, nice relationships, everything healthy, everything sweet. And I started to just like disconnect from the one who was over here, and I'm like, oh no,
she's dangerous. She's unruly.
No, that's not me anymore. And for me personally, in my story, it's interesting because I moved to New York when I was 25. And then after having my kids, I moved to Long Island. And so in Long Island, everyone who meets me only knows me as that mom. Nobody knows that girl that lived before. And so it became easy for me to deny her existence. Like when I go back home, everybody only knows that girl. And the fact that I show up as a mom with 3 boys, they're like, who are you? Like, who are you, this person? And learning to integrate that has actually helped me in my business, because it's like, you know what, I still am that person. And that rebellious, wild-hearted, wild-spirited woman can exist and be a mom.
Oh, I love that. It's so funny. Like, I feel like our stories are kind of like reversed, because I did, like, along my healing journey, I had to do like so much work of like forgiving Rebel for all the crazy stuff she did, like really bringing her with me, giving her a seat at my table, if you will. Sure. And so before I became a mom, that was stuff that had already happened. And now that I'm a mom, I just did a podcast episode on this of like, there's this like 1950s side of me that's coming out now, who wants to bake cookies and wear aprons. So I'm like, who is this chick? And I'm just kind of like watching her, but I'm so fascinated with her because I don't know her yet. And before I gave birth, I remember saying to, I think maybe on the podcast too, about I'm really excited to meet this mother in me, because I haven't really, I was never the girl that dreamt of getting married and having babies. And that's, I've been blessed that that's been my life path to meet this wonderful man and have a son with him. But I haven't really given a whole lot of thought of, well, what kind of mom do you want to be? Because that wasn't something that I really wanted. So now that I'm here and I'm this mom, I'm like, so what kind of mom do I want to be? And like, it's just really funny watching her evolve and come out and play. And I think she's really cool. I'm really excited to get to know her.
That's so fascinating that you say that. And maybe that's why you said like we're kind of playing it on different sides, and it makes total sense, because growing up, that's all I ever wanted. And it wasn't that like I wanted to like be a mom and be a housewife, and like that wasn't, I had many other dreams.
Oh yeah.
And no judgment on people who that's the dream they have, but just saying that for me, but it was such a strong pull to be a mom and to find my life partner, that like I was literally obsessed with finding my life partner my whole life. And that, ended up contributing to why I got into so much trouble, because it was like I was just obsessive about it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why once I finally got what I wanted, I like carefully crafted a bubble, like you using your mom bubble, that could not be penetrated, because I was like, no one is going to come near this thing. This is my precious gift, and nothing is going to come between me and this precious gift, including myself. That girl who made horrible decisions in her past is not allowed to penetrate this bubble. Yeah. But you're so right that it's embracing her and saying, hey, girl who used to cause trouble, you made this with me. Like, we did this
we need you. Like, we need you here.
Exactly.
It's so funny. Like, and like the more conversations I have with women about, their wild side, it's like we all have that piece of ourselves, and how much we have judged her and tried to like put her in a box and put her in a corner and hide her away. And I think that there's something really powerful about giving her a space, giving her a platform, because that wildness, that's the passion and the fire and the muscle and the drive, the vision. Like, she has so many beautiful qualities that we need. And not only do we need personally, but the world needs. Our wild side gets shit done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And as you're talking about that, in my head, it's like you always hear, and it's not to make this an argument or discussion about like men in society, but seriously for a minute, like men are expected to go out and sow their wild oats and be this like, crazy, discover who you are, make all the mistakes you need, all that, and be this rebellious character. But women are supposed to be sitting in their homes, baking cookies, waiting for the man to finally be done with his oats so that we can start a family. And yeah. I really have an issue with that.
Let's call BS on that, right?
So so much BS on that, because we need to do that too. We Absolutely. Need to figure out who we are and make those mistakes, so that when we're in our beautiful home with our husbands and our children, we can say like, this is what I wanted because I saw all the stuff I didn't. Like, I did all the stuff that was, that was crazy. And I'm like, okay, I'm definitely in the right place. There's no question.
Yeah. And I think too, like when we come from like a very healed place with all this, like our wild side is that piece that wants us to be fully expressed in the world. And so when we start talking about creating purpose and meaning and joy and fulfillment, I mean, what we're really talking about is giving ourselves permission to be all of who we are and to express that freely. And that often means coming up against a lot of the rules of who women are supposed to be in our culture. And it doesn't mean that like you're going to behave badly. And that's not what I'm like encouraging. But what I'm encouraging you to do is to be brave and to be courageous. And if something doesn't feel good, then do some digging and do something about it, because living by somebody else's rules or expectations does not give us the space for us to experience the full depth and breadth of joy that we're really here to experience. So our wildness, it has a lot of different flavors, a lot of different reasons why we need this. But for me, it's probably the biggest gift. And if you would have told me that back when I was a teenager, I would not have believed you. But looking back now, it's like, wow, like she's somebody I want to hang out with. And like, I want to sit down and have a glass of wine with her and pick her brain about what she thinks we should do. Because she has some good ideas, if you can trust her. And I think that's the big piece is when you do the healing of forgiving the parts of yourself that you regret, you really build a lot of self-trust, which I think creates more confidence, more conviction, more courage in the long run.
That again, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to watch this over again just to take all the beautiful nuggets. But again, I completely agree with you. And that's so important, that healing aspect, because then you're not feeling like the wild girl or wild child is going to take over your life all of a sudden and sabotage it. Because that's the fear that we don't trust. Like those of us who were wild and, and like I agree with you, pretty much all of us at some point have experienced that. We're afraid that she's going to come back and just like mess things up. And like certainly was my fear before. I was like, you know what, I'm in a different place and I'm the same person, but I'm an evolved version of that person. So even the wild child, who got what she wanted, is grounded enough to not destroy the beauty that she's built. The reason that she was destructive and sabotaging was because of that misalignment with who she is. It's such a beautiful thing.
Oh my God, yes. And I think, one of the things that I had a very traumatic birth with my son, and I talk about it in episode 75 of the podcast. And because of that experience, I really felt like it was an invitation to be braver and to really step into the arena. And that part of that is why I'm writing my book, because I wanted to do it for so long, but I've just been kind of on the parameters of really becoming the woman who could really share her journey of being wild and how that led me to finding that holy center within me and with God, right? But I think that we need to be pushing the envelope for ourselves. And if we stop pushing that envelope, I think we're getting a little bit too comfortable. And it doesn't mean that being comfortable is bad. I mean, there's a lot of happiness here, but I think our soul purpose is to continue pushing and evolving and growing and expanding. And with that comes discomfort. So it doesn't mean we have to be totally out of our comfort zone at all times, but I believe in layers. And really just digging into new layers of our truth and really challenging ourselves to live freer and truer to who we are. I think that is a life well lived. So that's kind of my whole empowerment soapbox on.
Oh my God, I love it. I could literally sit here and just talk to you all afternoon about this topic because clearly I'm interested, and I think it's so important. It's so important to talk about these things because women don't want to admit, that wild side exists, especially after you become a mom. But integrating all of that is so essential to happiness for you, and also that, being an authentic person for your children. Because what ends up happening, and I don't know if you've gotten to that point yet with your son, but potentially you will. And where you see your children, sort of heading in certain directions, and all of a sudden, you panic and you project all of the wildness that you had, and you're like, oh, no, you are not going down that path, young man. That is not what you're going to do. And of course, that's the worst thing you could do as a parent.
Totally. No, I've been it's interesting that you say that, because I've been writing about this. In the book, I share a life story. And then I give a lot of reflection as to why this was going on, how we ended up here, how I've unraveled it, how I've made sense of it, how I've healed from it. And the beginning of the book is this knockdown, drag out fight between my mom and me. And it doesn't even resemble who I am today at all. I was so full of rage and hurt and pain, almost punched her in the face. And this is not the way I even closely relate to my mother today. But I talk about how, when we take our kids' behavior so personally, because we see these kids as an extension of ourselves. And so our ego is very tied into this. And if we can detach from that and realize that they're their own autonomous being and this own autonomous soul, we realize that their decisions they're part of their life. It's part of them gaining the wisdom, right? But I think if we try and control too much and try and like keep them too safe, what we're really saying unintentionally is, I don't trust you. I don't trust that you can figure this out. I don't trust that you can make the right decision. So I'm going to go and do it for you. And what a disservice to our kids, right? Now, keep in mind, people, as I'm saying this, my son is 7.5 months. He's not anywhere close to going and trying cigarettes or like doing anything that really, really worries me. But, you know, as I approach this, like, I really want to be just curious. I want to be a curious space for my kid and try and be as unattached as possible, which is not going to be 100% possible because I'm very emotionally invested. As parents, I think we all are. But I will say the unconscious parent, what's Shafali's last name?
Yes, Tabari. Yes, I'll link it because it's an amazing book.
Yeah, it's very, very wordy. It's not an easy read, but there's a lot of great stuff in there just about authentic parenting and wholehearted parenting, which I really appreciate. So
yeah, it really, you know, I find myself with my kids. And so I have an 8, 6, and 4-year-old. And especially, you know, with the older ones, like I start picking out things and it's like, oh, that like this is going to lead to that. And this is going to lead to that. And the truth is that you're right. They are autonomous human beings that although our genetics may play a part or our nurturing plays a part, there's a lot of free will that is there. And I really always liken it to, you know, the spiritual connection we have in that, you know, like what we want for our children, you know, and what the universe wants for us is very similar, right? You want them to follow their happy place, you know, their happy path, to always be fulfilled, to make good decisions. But yet each of us, just as them, have their own choices to make when they are faced with whatever obstacles or challenges are there. And it is only up to us to give them love through that journey.
Oh, yeah. Totally. And I think the more that you practice that with yourself, giving yourself the love and compassion to kind of bring everything full circle, the more we can actually practice that with ourselves. I think the more we're not only modeling that for our kids, but we're really doing a great service to ourselves, because kids are very smart. When you say something but do something different, kids pick up on that. I mean, they really do. So if you're going to practice being loving and compassionate, I would hope that your kids are seeing you practice that towards yourself. So yesterday for me, as I'm walking through this grief of knowing that this is a transition I'm going through, like, how do I honor that? And granted, my son isn't old enough to even be paying attention to any of this, but I am mindful, like, what am I actually showing him through my actions, through my words, instead of saying one thing and doing another? Like, I really want to be mindful of what I'm demonstrating, because I think actions always speak louder than words.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I think we're going to try to wrap it up because, like I said, I could literally talk to you all afternoon about this. But let's talk about what I think you have a couple of freebies for our audience. So let's talk about that.
So we forgot to mention, I am a podcast host of the Enoughness Revolution. We are in season 2. We're almost, we're going to hit 150 episodes by the end of this season, which is super exciting.
Woohoo! That's awesome.
I know. So part of season 2 is Motivational Mondays, where I share a new mantra with all of the listeners. And I've actually created volume 1 of all the 20 mantras that we cover in this season. So the download is an ebook, and it has each mantra listed out, but I've also embedded an audio recording of each one. So if you ever feel like you're kind of in this funky place, you're sad, you're down, you need some hope, you need some inspiration, you want to feel more empowered and connected to your truth, then hop on that little ebook and pick a mantra that just resonates with you and hit the audio recording, and I'll say that mantra with you so you're never alone.
That's so awesome. I love that idea. And I know that our viewers and listeners are definitely going to enjoy that. Thank you so much, Megan. It has been so amazing having you on. This discussion, first of all, is super essential. And secondly, it was totally enjoyable.
Thanks so much. I had a blast.
Okay, so that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching, and tune in next time. Let's do our little wave. Bye.